My First Million is a top-ranking business podcast that averages over 1 million downloads per month and has a YouTube channel with over 540,000 subscribers at the time of filming this video. It's a show hosted by entrepreneurs like Sam Parr and Sean Burry, both who have built and exited businesses worth well over $10 million. Now, of course, I'm a big fan of the show, but in this video, I'm going to be analyzing from a producer's perspective in a way where we can leverage these lessons for our own podcasts. I'm going to make sure to highlight some lessons that would get easily overlooked if you're not a nerd about this stuff like me. I'm going to go over all 9 lessons, but make sure to stick around until the end because the 9th one is definitely the most mind-blowing in my opinion. The first lesson from My First Million is definitely around the flexible format. So if you've noticed over the years, they've had some episodes that have been in person where they have comfy armchairs, high quality studio, especially if there's a big guest like Tim Ferriss who agrees to do the show. But a majority of the episodes have also been done remotely. One of the things that I really like is that Sam does not always need to be there when Sean is doing an episode, and Sean does not always need to be there when Sam is doing an episode. They've had multiple episodes over the years where, one person has been present. And I think because they've done that, whether that's out of necessity or it is by design, it has opened up their show to have way more interesting conversations. Because, for example, Sean Burry is very obsessed with Tim Ferriss, big inspiration for him. So for that conversation, it was done in person. It was just Sean and Tim. For some other episodes, Sam Parr might be kind of bringing the main meat to the show. And then other times there are solo episodes that Sean might hop on and do solo. One of the most notable things about their format is the fact that both co-hosts are not always there when they're doing an episode. Now, this is not always been the case. This has been something that's recently over the years, as I'm sure they've gotten busy, or whether it's by necessity or by design. Sam sometimes will do an episode where Sean is not there, and sometimes Sean will do an episode like with Tim Ferriss. Big inspiration for Sean. He's a big fan of him. It was just him and Tim versus him, Tim, and Sam. There are many times where there are 3 people involved in the conversation. You have Sean, you have Sam, and then there are many episodes where both co-hosts are involved in the conversation. But I think the fact that they've normalized the idea that both people don't have to be there. There will be sometimes solo episodes. There will be sometimes episodes where Sam is leading it. Sometimes Sean is leading it. This gives us more of a variety of content coming from them, and also it giving us access to different perspectives. So I love some of the episodes where they do individual ones, and I love many of the episodes where it's just them. Sometimes there's no guest whatsoever. And so keeping this format open early on gives you flexibility, okay? It doesn't lock you into maintaining this crazy high quality studio and flying out all your guests, Ubering them to the studio. Like, they have access to a lot of high quality people at this point, and they are able to do it. They can certainly still do that if they want to, but I think that the formatting gives them flexibility, which they're probably appreciating now that they are at episode 635 plus. So the lesson is, you don't have to be so rigid in your formatting. It can evolve. It will change over the years, especially if you are doing it long enough where you're lucky to do hundreds and hundreds of episodes like they have. The second lesson is co-host compatibility. Sam Parr and Sean Burry are amazing on camera. They have great chemistry, but that's because they've also been friends off air before they started the show. And when they started the podcast, they've been doing it now for over 600 episodes, which means it's been going on for years. The notable thing about their partnership is that, one, they've been able to make it for 600 plus episodes. It takes a lot of not just chemistry with your co-host, but also kind of a shared vision for you both to be able to last that long, right? Because the shows that have a co-host format typically, I think, stop earlier than ones where there is one solo host or operator, just because you have more control, right? Versus when you have a co-host 50-50 on certain decisions. So you have to make sure that not just aligned on, the chemistry you have, but aligned on your vision, your values, and your mission for the show. I will note that if you're a fan of My First Million, you've probably heard, there was an episode recently where, they considered ending the pod altogether, and they had butted heads about some decisions related to doing the pod. And you could tell on air, right, that like Sam was pretty ticked off, and they took some time to explain what was going on, what they were thinking. And the fact that that doesn't or hasn't happened more often is actually surprising, right? The fact that it took over 600 episodes before, you kind of consider like, are we going to just stop doing this altogether, is a very, very long time. So what I'm trying to say here is a key element of your show succeeding is who you decide to do it with, especially if that co-host format is going to be your thing. Because if that person decides to quit 3 years into it, guess what? You have to figure out how to replace them or how to keep the show going, especially now that you have formed an audience who is aware of the other person as well. This has happened with really, really big shows in the past. And so, history repeats itself, and it's really good for you to have some plans around an exit strategy. What happens if one of us decides to stop doing this thing? Are we open to putting in the work? Are we aligned on the expectations that we have for each other? All those things are great things to discuss before embarking on a podcast journey with a steady co-host. The third lesson is character development. This is probably one of the coolest ones because if you remember Sean from a little bit early on in the podcast, he was kind of a little bit cranky. He was a little bit skeptical, right? He was a little different. And then I think there's this transformational period where, he got really, really good at storytelling. He started, I don't know, just something in his personality. You could see it start to shift, not in a bad way, in a great way, actually. But that's something that you don't often get the chance to witness outside of just movies or TV shows where there's a traditional character arc and you see characters develop. But these are real people where you get, they have normal lives outside of the podcast. They've started new businesses. They've exited new businesses. They have kids. They have families. They have, their health has evolved over the years. Like Sean has gotten really jacked and fit, right? So it's very interesting how both of them, you get to just see them live life and evolve. And it kind of feels cool because likely that is happening to you as well, even though it might not be on the exact same track as them. The reason that character development is so important is without it, everything goes kind of stale. So the fact that Sean and Sam have both been able to incorporate their real-time and current interests into the show is probably what kept the show fresh and allowed it to keep going to a place where it's over 600 episodes. These aren't just principles around starting a business. Sometimes they are in the middle of running their business and they're sharing lessons that they're extracting from that. So I think the takeaway here is play the long game. Invest in putting out content over a long period of time, because what it does is it captures the development, right? This probably would not have happened if he did it on Instagram or something the same way, right? This is very specific to something like podcasts or YouTube videos where there is this catalog effect. People often go back years and years later and go consume this stuff, versus a lot of times the character development with something like Instagram is totally lost because you don't really go back beyond a couple rows in the grid, right? The encouraging part is you don't need hundreds of episodes to achieve this effect of character development. It begins to start happening with a dozen or a couple dozen episodes. But the cool part is if you stick it out and you hang in there, over the years, it's really cool to build a body of work, build a catalog that you can look back on that is kind of like a mini documentary, right? Without you even trying. It's not this fake vlog style thing. It's literally capturing your thinking in real time as it evolves over the years, right? So it's kind of like those photo time lapses where people took a photo every single year for like 50 years and they do like a little flip book of it. One, I think it's really useful and cool to have that for yourself, but I think it's even cooler that other people get to experience that part of you without you consciously trying to manipulate it like you might on something like Instagram. The fourth lesson that I want to highlight is their studio setup. And there's a key part I want to zoom in on. So there's a couple dozen episodes they did where they were doing it remotely and it looked like they were in the same room. And a part of how they achieved that effect was they both had the exact same color walls. They both set up the framing of the shot in such a way where it was really balanced. Like even the edge of the table that you could see, it was the same wooden color. The background and the back wall and the shelf that they had, or like, the warm white light that they had. Okay, cool. Sam also had that on his side. And a huge part of that signal to the brain, whoa, are they in the same room? Like, are just on different computers? Like, it looked like they're literally sitting across from each other. And so what's cool about this is, even though this is done remotely, when they're going back and forth where the camera's switching automatically, it's very cool because it feels like it's done in person, and it looks very high quality and professional because the framing is so good, right? The framing is so accurate. They're probably using the rule of thirds and, the grid lines that show up on your camera to make sure that you're accurately doing that. And I think that that's a lesson that more people who are podcasting can take with them, right? Setting up your shot and also your guest's shot in a way that is even 1% better, because a lot of people, you'd be surprised at how they roll into the frame, even if you as the host have done a great job of crushing your side of things, right? You can't always control what your guest is doing, but when you have a steady co-host and you're going to be doing a podcast for a while or for the foreseeable future, then hey, it gives you room to be like, do we have a room in our house where we can, paint the walls the same color? Can we set up things that are kind of similar to give it that look? It's definitely not going to be for everybody to take it to this extent. But if you are somebody who's trying to up your production quality and you have a remote podcast and you also have a show where there's a co-hosted format, there's a lot that you can learn from their studio setup and how that has evolved over the years. Because remember, some episodes used to be in person and those are cool, but they're not as relatable, right? I think some of the ones that are done remotely feel like you're just hanging out with them on Zoom. So anyways, that technique of being able to match your studios in these subtle ways, even if it's just the wall color and like one plant and then the desk is the same color, right? All of a sudden everything goes, whoa, like you guys are in the same location, you're in some high quality studio, you're sitting across from each other. I thought it was really impressive that their team was able to put together that effect. Now, they didn't stick with that forever. I think Sam switched rooms and all of a sudden he's, maybe in the basement or in another room where the walls are a totally different color, right? But I think that lesson is worth learning from. And if it makes sense for you, definitely take advantage of it because it's unique. The fifth lesson is in their catalog count. The reason this is so significant is because most podcasts don't go beyond 3 episodes. And I think 7 episodes, like very, very few podcasts make it past the 7 episode mark. And so now you're looking at somebody who has put together a body of work that is 635 plus episodes. This is significant because if you did 1 a week, you have about 50 a year, right? And so if you think about it, to achieve 100 episodes, that's 2 years. To achieve 200, that's 4 years. They've been doing this for a long time. And so what's impressive is there is credibility in just the catalog. So even if, let's say, a lot of the experience that Sam and Sean have was not there, and they literally were just people who were exploring business ideas and, talking to cool people and just kind of curating a lot of this stuff, and they did 600 of those episodes, there would be some credibility that's established from that, right? You would go, wow, you've clearly gone deep into this thing to have done it 600 times. And in your head, you kind of begin to do the math like, whoa, that is a lot of years. Like they must care about this thing to put that many years of their life into it. What's cool is they've been around forever. I wish I discovered them earlier, but I never came across their stuff until a couple hundred episodes in. And so it's really cool because if this happened with their Instagram, there's no way I'm going back more than a year, if that, into their grid, right? But if you look at something like their podcast feed, or I consume it mainly on YouTube, I go back all the time to older episodes from last year, 2 years ago, and it creates an opportunity for this binge effect, right? So we just know with podcast behavior, when somebody discovers one episode and they really like it, they are very, very likely to consume another 3, another 5, another 10 in a very short period of time. So what's cool about this is when you have 600 opportunities for this to happen, it's no longer just like, oh, people are just binging the first 10 episodes. You've got people that are coming in simultaneously and binging different parts of this. Some are starting from the very beginning. Some are starting from episode 635. Some are starting going back to episode 200. You have so many opportunities to create that wow factor where people go, okay, I'm in, I'm subscribed, I'm a fan for life. You have more of that than if you just had maybe 10 episodes and you're trying to really grow the show, right? When you have 600, for whatever reason in the podcast game, it speaks volumes because that episode number shows all of the years of work, all of the failures, all of the attempts, and bigger guests who come on your show really tend to respect that. So think about creating content for your brand or business in the same way. It's not just one piece of content. You're going for a catalog. You're trying to build a body of work online. And that's what we do with my company, Pod Mahal, specifically with YouTube and podcast production. So make sure to check out some of the details in the description below if that's appealing to you. The sixth lesson is word gaps and fillers. So there was an episode recently, this has not always been the case, but a couple episodes recently where it was edited a little heavier, right? So all of the ums and ahs are removed. There's a lot of cuts throughout, a lot of word gaps shortened. So the times where you'd be sitting there thinking and pausing, those things are all removed, right? I remember scrolling down into the comments for these episodes, and I remember seeing multiple comments where people are requesting for that stuff to like be uncut. Okay. So it's like, hey, leave it uncut, leave it unedited. Like those moments where there's pauses are actually more valuable to people than you would expect. It makes them feel like they're there with you in the moment versus when there's a lot of cuts that start to happen. So this is a very surprising lesson, right? Because on one end, the entire team at My First Million is probably thinking, hey, this is going to improve our production quality. We're going to remove the filler words. We're going to remove the word gaps, and we're going to, save some time for the viewer so they don't have to sit through that. But this is a great lesson in how quality is subjective. You've heard Gary Vee say this all the time, but it is true because the whole team thought this would increase quality. And to some people and to some viewers, it may have increased quality. But for many people, right, what we thought is increasing quality to them was actually lessening the quality, right? They were like, actually put the words back, keep it longer, keep it edited. I don't want all of that naturalness to be removed. It feels a little different, right? And so that's not something that I've just viewed, by the way, on My First Million's YouTube channel. I've actually seen this on multiple podcasts or creators who are typically used to having a uncut, unedited type of vibe. And then they basically add more cuts and things into it. People call it out and comment right away. So that's just something to keep in mind, okay? Yes, cutting out filler words and shortening word gaps might be very valuable to some audiences and to some people, and they might appreciate it. I think this is a really cool finding because you would normally expect that, hey, that's going to improve the quality. Viewers and people will love that there's no filler words and all that good stuff. But when you take it a little overboard and there's too many cuts and it seems, let's say, like there's a lot of the conversation missing, even if it's not, right? Even if it was just a 0.3 second word gap that you removed, or, you said, a couple times and you removed, that filler word. Okay. But to somebody who's a podcast audience and who's used to viewing things in a way that's pretty uncut, in their mind, it feels like something's missing. Like, whoa, what happened in between that cut and that cut, right? So your viewers might appreciate your mistakes and the naturalness that you're trying to get rid of more than you think. The seventh lesson is showcasing talent. I cannot tell you how many people I have discovered through the My First Million podcast that have had a profound impact on my life, and I would not have discovered them anywhere else. Yes, maybe now they're on other podcasts and things like that, but like I wouldn't have discovered them if it wasn't for Sam Parr and Sean Puri showing me to who they are. And two people that come to mind, Andrew Wilkinson and David Sendra of the Founders Podcast. I love both of their work, has had a great impact on me. And I know for a fact, I probably would not have discovered them through other people. Like, I'm sure they're on other pods, but I don't listen to some of those other pods, right? So I feel like not only did Sam and Sean get to utilize their network because they know some really cool founders, have access to some great people, but they used the opportunity to just showcase you towards the people that had great things to talk about and had interesting conversations to offer. Not the biggest followings, right? I think what's respectable is that Sam Parr and Sean Puri both did not go after just really famous guests just for the sake of it. You do have some really, really big players that they have on occasionally, and it's a big statement making type of episode, right? But for the most part, they're showcasing talent that it doesn't matter if they have a big audience already. The root of it is that they are interesting people. They have done something interesting. The way that they think is interesting. And so there are people like Andrew Wilkinson or David Senra who have had profound impacts on me and my work. And I would not have discovered them if it wasn't for Sam and Sean actually deciding to showcase them. And what I think is really cool about this is you can do the same. So there are people that are in your world, okay, in your vicinity, in your network that are interesting, but they might not be famous, okay? They don't have millions of followers. And yes, some episodes you do with guests are for getting you more reach and having some of that audience crossover, hopefully. But another strategy is to go after great content, go after making great conversations. And what you'll find is sometimes the people who have the biggest followings aren't always the ones who are leading the most interesting conversations. So take advantage of the people that you're around, the people that you have access to, who may really be able to deliver from a content perspective, but maybe not from an audience standpoint. So I hope you can see some of the value that smaller audience guests can offer that is almost essential for you to take up at some point, because you need some of those guests too, so you can help begin to build a body of work. And then maybe once you have, let's say 100 episodes, all of a sudden this whole new world opens up to you, right? Where really, really big people want to come on your show because you've passed that litmus test of doing 100 episodes and likely having a bit of a following from that. The eighth lesson is storytelling and structure. So this is something that Sean Puri in particular is excellent at. If you watch him over the years, it's probably a great masterclass in terms of how his storytelling has developed. But recently, I would say it's just getting better and better and better with each episode. And he's able to do this in a format, which is where he's delivering a solo monologue, just talking to you. He's able to do it when he's talking to Sam, and he's also able to do it when there's Sam and another guest. So it's very impressive over the past few years getting to see the level of storytelling that has been incorporated into the show. I have to imagine that some of that is consciously designed and baked in. So before they hop on and they do the episode, they probably have a couple stories that, they want to make sure that they get in. The next thing is they have great chemistry, right? So when one person is trailing off or forgetting something, like they know how to save each other and they know how to give layups to each other. So it doesn't feel fake. It doesn't feel forced. It's just something that is a natural instinct that you develop after years and years of podcasting with somebody. I think regardless of your format, the takeaway here is how do you build in more stories into your podcast episodes? And the way to do this is by just thinking about it ahead of time. So when you think about some of the things you're going to cover ahead of time, especially if it's just topics or subtopics, you now have something where you can go, okay, what's a story that's related to this? What's something that gets this point across? And it really is just time up front, deciding some of that. And then another portion is having the room and recognition to basically riff when it happens. So when a thought is triggered and a story comes to mind and you didn't plan it, being able to riff on that and pull off decent story structure. That's another thing also that you can tell. Not all of them are baked into these episodes because there's many stories where Sean, it looks like he came up with it in the moment and he's just, recalling all the details and doing it great on a first take. So leave room for spontaneity. Of course, there will be those stories that emerge just from, being in the moment. But if you're going to be a guest on a podcast, for example, make sure you don't go in empty-handed. You go in with 5, 10, 15 key stories around some of the things that you might be asked. And if you know those questions ahead of time, you can definitely prepare for it in a way where your whole episode feels like one story to another story, and it doesn't feel, and I mean, at this point, we don't have to overstate how important storytelling is and how it helps retain and recall really important points, and also how it helps with retention, right? And keeping your podcast viewers and people hooked and engaged. If you can develop that skill and hone that skill of telling stories in the context of your pod, one of the things that will quickly happen is your quality will rise in such a way where other people can't fully explain it, or they can't mimic it and catch up to it, because they can't just copy your stories, right? It's something that you are, it's like this character development that's being unlocked that is unique to you, okay? The stories that you will tell, the way that you will tell them, those are all things that it's worth doing the work to find. What is that? Okay, it's time for the 9th lesson. This is probably the most mind-blowing and my favorite, but it is around all the sales from the podcasts. So this is something that Sam Parr has shared publicly on multiple podcasts and his own. But when he launched his company called Hamptons, it is something that he drove signups through with the podcast. The number at that time was 10,000 signups within 30 days, and the price to join Hamptons is about $8,500 a year. So you have to think about that. Not all 10,000 of those people actually made it into the group, because it's a very curated group and you have to meet a couple different requirements. But at the same time, it's crazy because it shows you how you can use your podcast at a certain point for distribution. I mean, think about if you tried any other social platform to drive 10,000 signups to your new company, to your new application page within 30 days. And again, it's not just like $100 product or a $500 product. This is like an $8,500 recurring service. So a big lesson in why this is even possible is because podcasts are so synonymous with trust. You spend so much time with somebody, right? And they have, again, over 600 episodes now. So if you have even consumed 2% of those, you're like, wow, I've spent hours and hours with them. I trust these people. So I believe Hampton has around 1,000 members right now, which if you think about 1,000 times $8,500 per year, that is an $8 million per year in annual recurring revenue, which is pretty insane, right? Like, to think that that came off the back of a podcast is wild. And now, of course, there are many other sources for which there are signups and things like that coming through. But it's very important to note that that initial bump, right, that initial momentum that you need when you start something new was driven from a podcast. I mean, who would have thought that? A big takeaway from this is not to show you that like, hey, you're going to make $8 million from your pod too. It's to show you the power of trust and influence, right? One of the lessons to take from this is what happens when you gather people who have high spending power all together in one room. And that's kind of what podcasting is, right? It's like, even though they're not physically in one room, they're technically under one roof, right? They're under this umbrella of your podcast. And so think about founders or business owners, people who have high spending power. You have endless people who want to market and advertise to those audiences. So you immediately, if you have gathered a bunch of founders together and they have high spending power, guess what? You're going to make money. And I know that, there's a lot of other money being made through some of the other companies that they've built and exited, through ad revenue and all of that stuff. So I wanted to use the Hamptons example because the 10,000 signups within 30 days is absolutely insane. And it's also with a group of people who know that this is going to be very, very expensive. It's going to be thousands and thousands of dollars per year. And Sam has gone on to successfully launch a spin-off podcast called MoneyWise that is for his business Hampton. So this is really cool because that show is totally audio only, right? It is on YouTube, but it is audio primarily. And you can't see the faces of all of the people that are being talked to sometimes, but I think it's inspiring to see, because if you have more ideas, you can definitely use the mass that you've gathered from your podcast to assist those ideas, whether it is funding, whether it is distribution, whether it is finding talent. So getting to start a company off the back of your podcast that is doing $8 million in recurring revenue every single year is a big deal. It's not even considering what they're getting and all the byproducts that are coming just from My First Million itself. So I hope that's encouraging to you. I hope it's inspiring to see that you can do many things. Even if you've been doing the same pod for like 6 to 8 years, there are opportunities that are created that they could never have expected. I think the takeaway is that there are opportunities that are created from podcasting that they could never have predicted or expected. Sam could not have predicted maybe that Hampton was a company he was going to start until he was doing this pod and saw it as a viable thing, right? And I'm pretty positive he could not have gotten it to grow as quickly as he did if he did not have the podcast as a way to get that initial interest and trust right out the gate. So podcasting is powerful. I hope these lessons were useful to you. I hope a few of them resonated and you can take them with you. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out some of the free and paid resources that I have in the description below. They're designed to help you start or grow your own podcast and begin building your own body of work that converts. I appreciate you hanging out, taking the time, and I will see you on the next one.